people generally fear being perceived as stupid. Those who are considered fools are often mocked, underestimated, and dismissed. Society views them as a burden rather than an asset. For this reason, most people try to avoid looking foolish in front of their colleagues, family, and friends. Sometimes, we even go out of our way to appear more intelligent than we really are, just to gain respect or recognition. We care deeply about how others see us, what they think of us, and the opinions they form about our capabilities. Arthur Schopenhauer captured this idea in The Wisdom of Life. Due to a peculiar weakness of human nature, people tend to think too much about the opinion others have of them, even though a little reflection would show that this opinion, whatever it may be, is not essential to happiness. Despite this, we find it difficult to let go of others' perceptions. We want to be valued, and we fear being seen as unintelligent. However, there are certain situations where it can actually be beneficial for others not to hold us in high regard. In some cases, appearing to be foolish or incompetent can be more advantageous than being seen as highly intelligent. There is a significant difference between pretending to be foolish and actually being a fool. Feigning weakness can cause others to underestimate us, which can sometimes be a strategic advantage. A classic historical example of this can be found in the story of Zhuge Liang, a brilliant military strategist from China's Three Kingdoms period. One of his most famous maneuvers, known as the empty city strategy, took place when Liang found himself in an undefended city with an enormous enemy army approaching. Rather than fleeing or attempting to mount a futile defense, he decided to embrace a different approach. He faked vulnerability. He ordered the city gates to be left wide open and positioned himself on the walls, calmly playing his zither while a handful of servants casually swept the streets as if there were no imminent danger. This bizarre display completely baffled the enemy generals. They assumed it must be a trap. Convinced that an ambush awaited them, they decided to retreat, leaving the city untouched. Without lifting a single weapon, Zhuge Liang had successfully outmaneuvered his opponents. From a strategic perspective, appearing incompetent or naive can lead people to lower their guard, divulge unnecessary information, and fail to recognize someone as a potential threat or rival. Additionally, this kind of behavior can trigger what is known as a leniency bias, where people are less likely to hold someone accountable for mistakes if they perceive that person as genuinely incompetent rather than intentionally deceptive. In many cases, excessive confidence in one's own abilities can lead to serious errors. A modern example of this phenomenon can be seen in the work of Dr. Atul Gawande, a renowned surgeon known for his research on medical mistakes and how to prevent them. In his book The Checklist Manifesto, Gawande describes how even the most highly skilled surgical teams frequently made avoidable mistakes during operations requiring extreme precision. Despite their vast experience, they would often skip basic steps, believing that their expertise and knowledge rendered such precautions unnecessary. However, Gawande discovered that implementing a simple checklist, something that, at first glance, might seem almost childish or redundant for experienced professionals, led to a dramatic reduction in medical errors. Using these checklists forced even the most seasoned experts to adopt a beginner's mindset, meticulously reviewing each step as if they had never performed the procedure before. While this approach may have seemed unnecessary to elite surgeons, in practice, it significantly reduced surgical complications and saved countless lives. As Gawande himself put it, experience can be a double-edged sword. It can foster confidence and skill, but it can also lead to complacency and overconfidence, making experts blind to small yet crucial details. However, by adopting a mindset of humility, by approaching a task as if they were novices, professionals can create safer, more effective systems. This same principle applies far beyond the field of medicine. Feigning ignorance or playing dumb can sometimes help simplify complex situations and lead to more effective decision-making. We often have a tendency to overcomplicate things unnecessarily. Additionally, a well-documented cognitive bias known as complexity bias makes people favor complicated solutions over simple ones, even when simplicity is the better approach. Interestingly, people who are perceived as unintelligent typically have lower expectations placed upon them. This, in turn, can work to their advantage. Others will not expect them to assume significant responsibilities, nor will they rely on them for high-stakes decisions. For many, being ignored is a terrible feeling. Nobody wants to be perceived as useless. However, the truth is that human beings can be incredibly foolish. And in order to survive, we have been forced to develop intelligence as a countermeasure. Only by sharpening our intellect have we managed to prevent our own stupidity from leading to our downfall as a species. According to Dutch historian Van Voxel, who specializes in the study of human stupidity, this very stupidity has played a crucial role in the development of intelligence and civilization. Paradoxically, while stupidity remains one of the greatest threats to human progress, it is also the reason we have been compelled to evolve intellectually, to defend ourselves against its consequences. Human beings often make irrational decisions, driven by ideological convictions, social pressure, or blind adherence to beliefs. Throughout history, people have been willing to risk not only their own lives but also the survival of their entire species in the name of abstract ideals or national pride. For this reason, some world leaders have been willing to deploy nuclear weapons as a form of defense, failing to realize that by doing so, they not only destroy their enemies but also obliterate the very things they are trying to protect. From this perspective, the benefit of stupidity is that it has forced humanity to develop intelligence as a necessary survival mechanism. Van Voxel suggests that stupidity is the missing link between our ancient ancestors and modern humans. According to his research, it was precisely early humans' lack of competence that forced them to develop their cognitive abilities. Without stupidity, there would have been no incentive to become smarter. Among all our traits, intelligence is perhaps the one we take the most pride in, as it has allowed us to dominate the natural world. However, people often overlook the social consequences of being highly intelligent. Unlike wealth or power, both of which can garner admiration and privilege, intelligence is rarely met with the same level of social acceptance. In fact, being perceived as too smart can even create hostility. Schopenhauer explored this dynamic in The Art of Dealing with People, where he argues that intelligence does not always confer an advantage in social settings. In some situations, concealing one's intelligence is a much wiser strategy. Schopenhauer warns that it is reckless to make others aware of one's intellectual superiority, as this often breeds resentment. While wealth and social status may earn certain privileges, intelligence rarely does. On the contrary, it often leads to exclusion. In many cases, highly intelligent individuals are not just overlooked but are actively disliked. If someone stands out too much for their intellect, others may feel uncomfortable or even personally threatened. The Persian poet Sa'di once wrote, "Fools are 100 times more reluctant to associate with the wise than the wise are to accept the company of fools." From this perspective, appearing less intelligent can serve as a useful strategy. Just as warmth is pleasant to the body, the mind finds comfort in feeling superior. For this reason, people instinctively seek the company of those who make them feel intellectually dominant rather than those who challenge them. However, this tendency can lead to problems. If someone stands out too much for their intellect, they risk being excluded or even resented. This is precisely why Schopenhauer advises that if one wishes to be socially accepted, they should appear less intelligent than they actually are. This concept is explored in Parerga and Paralipomena, a collection of Schopenhauer's essays and reflections, where he examines how intellectual superiority often leads to envy and rejection. According to his analysis, intelligence does not grant the same social rewards as economic status or hierarchical power. This is because human nature is inherently competitive, and people tend to reject any form of superiority that threatens their own self-image. Schopenhauer did not limit himself to discussing abstract metaphysical ideas, he also wrote practical advice on how to navigate society. In his later works, he reflects on how individuals of great intellect should conduct themselves in a world that is not always welcoming to intelligence. One of his conclusions was that, in many situations, pretending to be less intelligent is the most effective way to avoid unnecessary conflict. Intelligence is often envied because it is perceived as an unfair advantage. Unlike wealth, which can be earned or inherited, intelligence appears to be an intrinsic trait that some are born with, making it a source of resentment for those who do not possess it to the same degree. This same psychological pattern can be observed in how people justify differences in status. When confronted with someone who is clearly more intelligent, many people attempt to rationalize it by saying things like, "They had access to better education. If my parents had been rich, I would be just as smart. They're not really that intelligent, they just got lucky." This happens because acknowledging someone else's intellectual superiority without explanation can be damaging to one's ego. It is similar to the resentment people feel toward those who inherit vast fortunes without having worked for them. Throughout history, many brilliant individuals have faced rejection or indifference from society. One of the most striking examples of this is Nikola Tesla. Despite his groundbreaking discoveries, Tesla was often dismissed and overshadowed by more influential figures of his time, such as Thomas Edison. Even though he made some of the most significant contributions to modern technology, Tesla spent his later years in poverty, without receiving the recognition he truly deserved. His difficulty in navigating social and political networks, as well as the envy of his peers, contributed to his legacy being overlooked until long after his death. Both Schopenhauer and Tesla had to learn the hard way that intelligence alone is not enough to guarantee success in society. In an era where people constantly compete to be recognized as intellectually superior, Schopenhauer suggests an alternative strategy, pretending to be less intelligent than one actually is. It is important to clarify that he does not advocate for becoming ignorant but rather for temporarily downplaying one's intelligence in order to avoid unnecessary resistance or hostility. This approach not only prevents envy but can also serve as a strategic tool to gain advantages in certain social interactions. The Chinese have a proverb that illustrates this idea well. "Disguise yourself as a pig to catch the tiger." This phrase originates from an ancient hunting technique in which the hunter would cover himself with the skin of a pig and mimic its sounds. The powerful tiger, believing it was approaching an easy meal, would lower its guard, allowing the hunter to get close and strike at the perfect moment. Schopenhauer learned the value of this strategy in a painful way. His own mother, with whom he had a tense relationship, once wrote him a letter when he was just 19 years old, saying, "All your good qualities are overshadowed by your excessive intelligence, and they become useless to the world simply because of your obsession with knowing more than others and trying to control what you cannot. With this, you only make people resent you." This phenomenon is not exclusive to philosophy. It applies to any field where people compete for recognition, influence, or prestige, whether in science, literature, art, or social life in general. The underlying psychology of this dynamic can be explained through human tendencies toward conformity and resistance to change. Mediocrity, by definition, represents the norm and is widely accepted because it is familiar and easy to digest. True excellence, on the other hand, often challenges the status quo and disrupts existing structures. As a result, new ideas and revolutionary thinkers often face skepticism or outright rejection, not necessarily because their ideas lack merit but because they threaten the established order. This pattern is particularly evident in academia. Figures who introduce groundbreaking theories or innovative perspectives frequently encounter opposition from their peers, who may perceive these new ideas as a challenge to their own authority or intellectual standing. For this reason, mediocrity tends to be rewarded in the short term, while true merit often takes years, or even generations, to receive proper recognition. Tesla is a prime example of this phenomenon. His contributions were dismissed or downplayed during his lifetime, and his most innovative ideas were misunderstood. His eccentric personality, combined with the resistance of the scientific community and competition from more politically savvy rivals, contributed to his struggles. It was only long after his death that the full impact of Tesla's work was acknowledged. Schopenhauer and Tesla both experienced firsthand that intelligence, rather than being a guaranteed path to success, can sometimes be an obstacle. Those who are too intelligent for their time often find themselves isolated or ignored. Schopenhauer proposes a counterintuitive but effective solution. Instead of constantly trying to prove one's intelligence, it is sometimes wiser to hide it. This does not mean embracing ignorance but rather strategically controlling how one is perceived. Pretending to be less capable than one truly is can serve as a powerful tool, both in avoiding unnecessary conflicts and in gaining advantages when the time is right. As the Spanish philosopher Baltasar Gracián wrote in The Art of Worldly Wisdom, "Know how to use stupidity, even the wisest man plays this card at some point in his life." There are circumstances in which the greatest wisdom consists in appearing ignorant. It is not about actually being foolish, but about knowing when and how to appear less knowledgeable than one truly is. In the end, being wise among fools or sane among madmen is often more dangerous than it seems.